Breaking news right now. There will not be a trial for a man accused of killing 13-year-old Carrie Ann Jopak in 1982.
For 33 years, a mother searched for her missing daughter without knowing the answer was 40 feet from her own front door. She crossed that street. She stood in that yard. She asked the people who lived in that house if they had seen her little girl. And the whole time, the person she was asking already knew exactly where that little girl was, because he had put her there himself, with his own hands, in the dark, while a party kept going on just above his head. That is not a metaphor. That is what happened to Carrie Ann Jopak. It would take 33 years, 3 separate phone calls made in a single desperate morning, and one man's conscience finally collapsing under its own weight, before the truth finally came to light. Welcome to Cold Case Narrator. If you're new here, hit subscribe. It helps more than you'd think. Now, let's go back to where this started. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, March 16, 1982, 1:30 in the afternoon. 13-year-old Carrie Ann Jopak is walking home from Kosciuszko Middle School, and she is not happy about it. She's just been suspended, sent home for walking the halls without a pass, according to the official record, though the story shifts slightly depending on who's telling it. Either way, she knows her mother is going to be upset. She's dreading the conversation waiting for her a few blocks away. It's the kind of dread every 13-year-old has felt at some point. Small, familiar, survivable. She has no way of knowing it's the least of what's coming for her that day. She is the oldest of 2 girls. Her mother, Carolyn, and her biological father had separated years earlier, though Carrie still saw him regularly and stayed close with him. By 1982, Carolyn had remarried. A man named Fred, who'd become Carrie's stepfather, and the family lived together on South 10th Street, on Milwaukee's tightly packed working-class South Side, along with Carrie's younger sister, Maggie. Carolyn would later describe her oldest daughter as smart, artistic, always drawing or singing something. Headstrong, too. The kind of girl who liked getting her own way and wasn't afraid to argue about it. A good kid, her mother would say years later, who'd simply grown up a little too fast. It would matter later, that phrase. More than anyone standing on that ordinary sidewalk in March of 1982 could have imagined. The school had called Carolyn that afternoon and given her a choice. Come pick Carrie up or let her walk. It was a short walk. Carrie had made it alone more times than anyone could count. The neighborhood was the kind where people still left their front doors unlocked in the daytime, where kids drifted between houses without much supervision, where everybody on the block had known everybody else's children for years. Carolyn said, let her walk. 1:30 becomes 2. 2 becomes 3. And somewhere in that stretch of ordinary afternoon, Carrie never turns toward her own front door at all. She never made it home. By evening, with no sign of her daughter, Carolyn crossed the street to check the one place Carrie was almost always found, the home of her best friend, a girl named Robin, whose family lived just across the road. Robin told her she hadn't seen Carrie since the day before. That wasn't quite true. Earlier that afternoon, while their mother was at work, Robin and her older brother John had thrown a small party. A handful of local teenagers, alcohol, marijuana, no adults in the house, the ordinary, reckless kind of gathering that happens in 100 houses on any given weekday when the adults are somewhere else. At some point, Carrie had walked in. Nobody would admit that for a long time. Not that night. Not for years. Carolyn spent the evening going door to door, calling every friend she could think of. Nothing. By 11 o'clock, she had a search party of family and neighbors walking the streets calling Carrie's name into the dark, checking alleys, checking porches, checking anywhere a 13-year-old might have wandered off to sulk after a bad day. Still nothing. The next morning, Carolyn walked into the Milwaukee Police Department and reported her daughter missing. Here is what nobody in that room understood. Carrie was already gone. Less than a day after she vanished, she was already resting somewhere less than a block from where her mother now stood, filling out a missing persons report. The investigation, at first, leaned toward one explanation, that Carrie had simply run away. It's an understandable read on a rebellious 13-year-old freshly suspended and nervous to go home. Police told Carolyn there were too many runaway cases to give one girl special attention. Carolyn told them, flatly, that she knew her daughter. She knew Carrie hadn't run. Nobody acted on it. It would be over a year before anyone in an official capacity treated Carrie's disappearance as anything other than a teenager who'd simply decided not to come home. Detectives did look at the family, the way investigators almost always do. Fred, the stepfather, drew early suspicion after he poured a new concrete patio in the backyard not long after Carrie disappeared. Timing that raised an obvious, uncomfortable question. Was a grieving stepfather quietly sealing over the one piece of evidence that could convict him? Police brought in ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the new concrete. Nothing. Fred was cleared, though the suspicion would follow him quietly for years regardless. The kind of thing a family doesn't fully talk about again but never quite forgets either. Investigators also looked at Robin's older brother, John Mant, 4 or 5 years older than Carrie with a local reputation for petty theft, and rumors that he'd shown romantic interest in a girl who was, by any measure, far too young for him. He was brought in, denied any knowledge of where Carrie had gone, and with nothing to hold him on, was released. Carrie's own biological father was checked too, briefly. He'd been at work the entire afternoon, with people who could confirm it, and was crossed off the list almost immediately. Weeks passed. Tips led nowhere. Reported sightings of Carrie turned up around the city and evaporated on closer look. Even Carolyn herself once mistook a stranger on the street for her own daughter, calling out her name before realizing, with a particular kind of cruelty that only false hope can deliver, that it was someone else's child entirely. Flyers went up around the neighborhood. The local paper ran her photograph. Neighbors who'd known Carrie her whole life were stopped on their porches and asked the same questions over and over, and gave the same answers over and over. Nothing. Nobody. No idea. None of it produced anything. By the end of 1982, the case had gone cold. It would stay that way for a year and a half. On September 2, 1983, a contractor named Conrad was hired to tear out an old back porch and lay a new one. The house belonged to the Mant family, Robin's family. As Conrad dug into the ground beneath the old decking, his shovel struck something that wasn't wood or stone. He pulled it back and saw hair mixed into the dirt. What he'd found, buried only a few inches beneath the surface, in the backyard directly across the street from Carrie's own home. The same yard her mother had likely stood in during those first frantic days of searching, was the skeletal remains of a young girl. John Mant was in the yard when the remains came up. Witnesses said he became physically ill. Police arrived quickly. The scene drew a crowd of neighbors gathering behind the tape, the same instinct that pulls people toward flashing lights anywhere. Word moved down the block the way it always does in a neighborhood where everyone already knows everyone. Carolyn was among the crowd within the hour. She has said in the years since that she simply knew, before any confirmation came, that it was Carrie. It took several days to make it official. Detectives couldn't rely on visual identification. The remains were too decomposed for that. Dental records matched. So did the clothing recovered alongside the body. Carrie was still wearing the coat and the high-top sneakers she'd had on the day she vanished, 17 months earlier, on what should have been an ordinary walk home from school. The autopsy found evidence of bleeding inside her skull, caused by a broken bone in her neck. 17 months of decomposition made it impossible for the medical examiner to say precisely how that injury occurred, or to confirm whether Carrie had been sexually assaulted before her death. What the examiner could say, and what would matter enormously, decades later, was that the pattern of the injury suggested some kind of struggle had taken place. Not an accident. A struggle. Carrie Ann, Joe Peck, had been murdered, and the investigation that followed had almost nothing forensic to work with. This was 1983. No DNA testing existed for a case like this, and 17 months underground had left little behind regardless. Detectives had a body, a cause of death, and a very short list of people who'd been anywhere near that backyard. John Mant was the obvious first name on that list. His sister had thrown the party. His family's yard held the grave. He'd been visibly sick at the discovery. Brought in again, he gave the same answer as before. He knew nothing. Released again. Rumors surfaced that a party really had happened at the Mant house that day, contradicting everything Robin and John had said for over a year. Other teenagers who'd allegedly been there were quietly re-interviewed. Nearly all of them said the same thing. No party, nothing happened. What detectives didn't know at the time was that almost every one of those teenagers was lying, and lying for the same small, selfish reason. Nobody wanted to admit to drinking and skipping school on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't loyalty to a killer. It was fear of getting grounded, fear of getting a friend's family in trouble, the ordinary self-protective instinct of teenagers who had no idea what they were actually covering for. But it built a wall of denial thick enough to give the one person in that house who did know something all the cover he needed. 4 days after the remains were confirmed, a neighbor called police with something strange. A young man had been seen kneeling alone near the site where Carrie's body was found, crying, repeatedly raising his hands toward the sky. That young man was identified as Jose Ferreira, 17 years old. He lived just a couple of houses down from the Mants. Brought in for questioning, Ferreira said he'd simply been grieving, that he'd gone to the site to pay his respects, nothing more. Asked about the rumored party, he gave the same denial as everyone else. No party. He didn't know anything. With nothing to disprove his story, he was released, just like John Mant before him. Here is what detectives did not know, sitting across the table from a 17-year-old boy in 1983. They had the right person, and he would walk out of that police station, go home, grow up, get married, grow older still, and carry what he knew for the next 32 years without saying a word. The case went cold again, and this time it would stay cold for far longer than anyone could have imagined. One more thread surfaces in the record from this period. In 1989, 6 years after Carrie's remains were found, an inmate at a Wisconsin correctional institution came forward claiming he'd once dated Robin Mant and that she had told him her brother John was responsible, that Carrie's body had been kept somewhere in the house for 2 or 3 days before it was buried. It was the kind of tip that could have reopened the entire case if it held up. It didn't hold up. Robin was re-interviewed. She confirmed the relationship and confirmed they'd once discussed the body being found, but firmly denied ever saying John did it. She suggested her ex was simply trying to hurt her after their breakup. A private conversation between two people who, by 1989, no longer agreed on what had actually been said inside it. Investigators had nothing to corroborate it either way. The lead died, and so, once again, did the case. For over 30 years, that was where it stayed. A grave, a cleared stepfather, 2 men who'd each been questioned and released, a jailhouse rumor that went nowhere, and a mother who never stopped believing someone, somewhere, knew exactly what had happened to her daughter. She was right. It's going to take one confession, delivered in the strangest possible way, to prove it. Not a fingerprint, not a database. A phone call made by a grown man on an ordinary Sunday morning, 33 years after he last spoke to Carrie Ann Jopek. A call nobody, least of all Carolyn, saw coming. Before we get to that call, this channel exists because of viewers who stick around for the whole story, not just the highlights. If you're finding this one worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think, and subscribing means you won't miss the next one. Now, back to Milwaukee. On the morning of October 11th, 2015, a reporter at WISN 12 News in Milwaukee picked up the newsroom phone. A man's voice on the other end said he wanted to confess to a murder. The station's news director would later call the account detailed, disturbingly so. Detailed enough that WISN contacted police before airing a word of it, before this became a story at all rather than a criminal matter. That same morning, The same man called a crisis hotline and told a counselor a story about a party in 1982, a 13-year-old girl, a fall down a flight of stairs, and a burial to hide what he'd done. He told the counselor he didn't know how much longer he could carry what he had done before facing the consequences. And he made a third call that day to his own estranged wife in the middle of their divorce. He told her everything, too. 3 confessions. Same morning. 3 people who had no idea the others existed. That is not a legal strategy. That is a man who has simply run out of road, 33 years after the fact, choosing this particular Sunday to finally set it down. His wife walked into the West Milwaukee police station in person that same day and repeated what her soon-to-be ex-husband had just told her on the phone. She had no obligation to do that. Their marriage was already ending. She did it anyway. His name was Jose Ferreira, the same boy who'd knelt crying at Carrie's gravesite in 1983. The same 17-year-old detectives had questioned twice and let go, twice for lack of evidence. He was 50 years old now. He'd built an entire adult life on that same stretch of Milwaukee's South Side, married, working, ordinary, with a secret buried underneath all of it that nobody around him ever suspected. Neighbors who'd known him for years would have described him, most likely, as unremarkable. That is very often exactly what proximity to violence looks like from the outside. Not a monster standing out on a quiet street, but a name on a mailbox a few doors down, indistinguishable from anyone else's. When the news broke in Milwaukee that a man had confessed to Carrie's murder after 33 years, it moved through the same neighborhood that had once searched the streets for her as a missing girl. People who'd grown up alongside both Carrie and Ferreira, who'd gone to the same schools, walked the same blocks, were suddenly hearing that the answer had been living among them the entire time. For Carolyn, it meant something else entirely. Not surprise, but a kind of vindication 3 decades in the making. She had told police back in 1982 that her daughter hadn't run away. She had been right the whole time. It had simply taken the rest of the world 33 years to catch up to what she already knew. Police arrested him on October 12th. He was formally charged on October 17th with second-degree reckless murder. In questioning, Ferreira laid out what happened. He'd been at the party at the Mant House, the same party nearly everyone had denied for over 3 decades. Carrie was there. He offered her a drink. At some point, the two of them ended up near the basement door, a space he said was known among the local teenagers as where couples went to be alone. He suggested they go down. Carrie agreed, and then, standing at the top of the stairs, changed her mind. "I don't know if this is a good idea," she told him. He told her she was going downstairs, and he pushed her. She fell, struck the railing and the wall on the way down, and landed at the bottom. Ferreira told police he believed in that moment that she was simply unconscious. What happened next is documented in the criminal complaint. This video won't repeat it in detail. It doesn't need to, for you to understand the gravity of what occurred, or the fact that Carrie was in no position to protect herself. What matters is this. At some point, Ferreira realized she wasn't breathing, realized her neck was broken, realized she was dead. A 13-year-old girl at a school day party in the middle of the afternoon, gone in the space of a fall that lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds. He panicked. He knew other teenagers had seen the two of them together, knew he'd be the obvious suspect if her body was found. So, instead of running, he made the decision that would define the next 33 years of both their lives. He opened a cellar door leading out to the backyard, found a small shovel, and for roughly 45 minutes, while the party carried on inside, music and laughter just above his head, he dug a hole beneath the back porch. He placed Carrie's body inside it. He covered her with dirt, noticed strands of her hair still visible, and covered that too. Above him, the party kept going. Nobody came outside. Nobody noticed. Then he left and told no one. When other teenagers later asked what had happened to Carrie, he said he didn't know. And when police first questioned him at the gravesite in 1983, He says he was following advice from his own brother. Deny everything. Say nothing. He held that line for 32 more years. He went to work, most likely. He celebrated birthdays. He got married. Somewhere underneath the surface of an entirely ordinary life, that afternoon never left him. There's one detail worth sitting with, because it complicates the tidy version Ferreira eventually gave detectives. In interviews given around the time of his arrest, Carolyn described an earlier, more private conversation she'd once had with Ferreira, years before his formal confession. In her account, he spoke of the night differently, using the word they, not I. He told her a group of them had been drinking, that they got scared, and that they wrapped Carrie's body before burying it. That detail, the plural, the wrapping, never appears in his official statement to police. Whether it reflects something he genuinely told her once, unguarded, or a detail that shifted somewhere between memory and retelling, was never resolved. But the question it raises would not go away quietly, and the state itself would eventually leave it hanging. Ferreira was charged with second-degree reckless murder, a charge carrying up to roughly 20 years. He pleaded not guilty. His defense spent months trying to establish that another man might have been responsible, a strategy that only makes sense if there was genuine uncertainty left in the case, even among the people paid to defend him. And in January of 2017, just as attorneys were about to select a jury for his trial, he changed course. He agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to attempted felony assault with force and false imprisonment, both charged as party to the crimes. That phrase is doing more work than it looks like it is. In Wisconsin law, party to a crime formally allows for the possibility that someone else was involved, either directly or by helping. The state never named a second person, but by charging him this way, prosecutors quietly left that door open, the same door Carolyn's private account had already cracked. We may never know who, if anyone, walked through it. In court, Ferreira said only, "I just want this over and done with." On March 17, 2017, 35 years and 1 day after he pushed Carrie down those stairs, Judge Jeffrey Conan sentenced him to the maximum his plea allowed. 5 years for the assault charge, 2 for false imprisonment, served back to back. 7 years for a life that ended at 13. Before sentencing, Ferreira turned to Carrie's family. "I can't take back how it happened," he said. "Sorry, from the deepest pain in my heart. Sorry." Carolyn sat through that hearing holding a photograph of Carrie at 13 years old. When it was her turn to speak, she looked at him directly. "He's still alive," she said. "Carrie's gone. The only time I'll see her again is in heaven." She didn't believe his apology, but she believed something else. Years before his arrest, Ferreira had once told her, privately, that he felt haunted, that he couldn't escape Carrie. Carolyn took that seriously in her own way. She came to believe her daughter's spirit had never let him rest. That girl was very persistent, she said. She kept on until it worked. Carrie's stepfather, Fred, for his part, said simply that it was better than gambling and risking a complete loss at trial. It wasn't the outcome the family wanted. It was the outcome a 34-year-old case, with almost no forensic evidence and a decomposed set of remains that could no longer speak for itself, could realistically deliver. Prosecutors had built their entire case on a confession given freely, 33 years after the fact by a man who could just as easily have said nothing at all and likely died with his secret intact. A confession broke this case, not a database. 33 years, from the one man who'd been there the entire time. Ferreira served his sentence and was released under extended supervision in June of 2020. He remains on the state registry in Wisconsin for life. John Mant was never charged with anything connected to Carrie's death. Neither was Robin. The 1989 jailhouse claim was never substantiated, and the question the state's own plea agreement left technically open, whether Ferreira really acted alone, was never closed in any courtroom. It likely never will be. Closed and solved in this case are not quite the same word. A plea deal answers a legal question. It doesn't always answer every question a family actually has. What's left, in the end, is a girl who walked toward the sound of a party instead of walking home. A secret that outlived half its keeper's own lifetime before it finally broke. And a family that got an answer, 33 years too late, that was never quite complete. One that raised nearly as many quiet questions as it resolved. She was 13, headstrong, artistic, endlessly persistent according to everyone who loved her. She argued with her parents the way every 13-year-old does, and underneath it, by every account, she was kind. She loved to draw. She loved to sing. She looked out for her little sister the way oldest children do. She had a best friend across the street she trusted enough to walk into that house on any given afternoon without a second thought. She should be 57 years old today, somewhere out in the world. She should have outgrown 13, outgrown the arguments, outgrown the trouble that got her sent home on an ordinary Tuesday. She should have had 4 more decades nobody got to witness. A career, a family, an entire adult life stacked on top of the one afternoon that took everything else away. She should have gotten old enough that 13 felt like someone else's story entirely, one she told at family dinners about how much trouble she used to be. She should have been in that courtroom in 2017 standing next to her mother, not the reason her mother was standing there alone. She never got any of it. What she got instead was a shallow grave 40 feet from her own front door, and 33 years of silence from the one person who could have ended it at any moment, and chose, for most of his adult life, not to. Silence protected Jose Ferreira for 3 decades. It never protected Carrie. It never protects anyone but the person holding it. Every teenager in that house who lied about the party in 1982 thought they were only protecting themselves from getting grounded. They had no idea what that silence, stacked together year after year, was actually shielding, or how long it would take one of their own to finally break it. The 1982 runaway assumption that stalled this case for over a year wasn't unique to Carrie. It was a pattern repeated in police departments across the country at the time, in cases involving teenage girls who were assumed to have chosen their own disappearance rather than had it forced on them. Carrie's case is one small, specific example of a much larger systemic blind spot, one that cost her family a year and a half they never got back, time during which a boy who knew exactly what happened walked freely through the same neighborhood where her body lay buried. If you know something about a case that was never solved, say it. The truth costs the person carrying it something. It always does. It costs the people waiting for it far more. Carolyn waited 33 years for 7 words in a courtroom. Don't make someone else's mother wait that long. Somewhere, right now, there's likely another family sitting in exactly the silence Carolyn sat in for over 3 decades, waiting on a truth that someone else is choosing, every single day, not to tell them. If this one stayed with you, hit like, subscribe, and tell us which moment landed hardest. No case stays cold forever. We'll see you in the next one.